They teach us to read in black and white.
Truth is this, the rest is false.
You are whole or broken.
Who you love is acceptable or not.
My life tells its truth in many hues.
We are taught to think in either ors.
I believe the teachings of Jesus or Buddha.
I believe in human potential or the power of a single or a power beyond a single human will.
I am broken or I am powerful.
My life embraces multiple truths, speaks of both, of and.
They teach us to see in absolutes.
Good versus evil.
Male versus female.
Old versus young.
My vision sees the fractions, the spectrum, the margins. I read your part.
That's it.
Let us open our hearts to the complexity of our worlds.
Let us make our own lives a sanctuary to nurture our many identities.
The day is coming when they will know.
That the rainbow world is more gorgeous than monochrome.
That a river of identities can ebb and flow over the static, stubborn rocks in the course.
That the margins hold the center.
Amen. Thank you. It was January 1st, 2011, and many of Egypt's Coptic Christians were celebrating the new year when the bomb exploded in front of the church in Alexandria, killing 21 and injuring another 70. Christians, a minority in Egypt at about 10% of the population, were terrified. And it was in this fear that they needed one another the most. Just a few days later, they were returning to church in large numbers to celebrate Christmas Eve. Coptic Christians have a different schedule of holidays than many of us are familiar with. And this is when the story changes. As they went to church together in fear, in faith, in a deep need to be together, these Christians were supported and loved by thousands of Muslims. Muslims from across the country went inside Coptic Christian churches and worshiped with their religious siblings. Even more stood outside of the churches holding vigil so that everyone inside could connect to one another and to their God in safety and love. It wasn't long after these events that Egypt erupted into revolution. In the midst of the violence and massive protests, nearly a month after thousands of Muslims stood alongside their Christian siblings, there emerged a picture that spread quickly through the world with the help of social media. This picture showed a ring of Coptic Christians surrounding a large group of faithful praying Muslims. It shows people in a square with protesters all around them in one of the most vulnerable positions possible, knelt, forehead on the ground before them as they trusted the Christians to protect them. And we hear more recent stories in the U.S. Last year in St. Louis and Philadelphia and elsewhere, vandals terrorized local Jewish communities by damaging and knocking over cemetery headstones. In response, Muslim communities began raising money to support their neighbors. One campaign started with a goal of $20,000 but raised $155,000, allowing them to help multiple communities. Egyptian Christians and Muslims, Midwestern Muslims and Jews. These and so many other peoples of faith choose to live in those moments for one another. And they did have a choice. They could have stayed home where it was safe. They could have attacked one another for their differences, but they chose instead to protect each other. They chose to embody love. And this choice is central to any journey of faith, Philosophers and theologians have reflected on it throughout history. In his poem, Self-Portrait, David Whyte says, "It doesn't interest me if there is one God or many gods. I want to know if you belong or feel abandoned, if you know despair or can see it in others. I want to know if you are prepared to live in the world with its harsh need to change you. If you can look back with firm eyes saying, 'This is where I stand.' I want to know if you know how to melt into that fierce heat of living, falling towards the center of your longing. I want to know if you are willing to live day by day with the consequence of love. I want to know if you are willing to live day by day with the consequence of love." As Unitarian Universalists, we too are part of a tradition that calls us to live an embodied, consequence-filled, radical love into the world. Our first principle tells us that every person has inherent worth and dignity. That changes how we relate to one another, and it changes how we relate to ourselves. I've heard people say that Unitarian Universalism is an empty faith. They say you can believe anything you want and be Unitarian Universalist, which means there's nothing that holds us together. In fact, who's ever seen The Simpsons that they're willing to confess to? So The Simpsons frequently jokes about Unitarian Universalism, but there's one in particular where they're getting ice cream, and it's ice cream related to all these different faiths. And the pastor offers Unitarian Universalist ice cream, and Lisa wants that, and so she takes it, and she's like, "But the bowl is empty." And he goes, "Exactly." But he's wrong. The truth is that it's difficult to be Unitarian Universalist. Ours is a religion that calls us to treat ourselves and others with life-changing love. It calls us to own up to our mistakes and failures, to embody love, and to try again. It calls us to consider the challenging principles of justice and compassion and the reality that we are interdependent with all of life in this world. Unitarian Universalism can be confusing for people both inside and outside our congregations. We don't look like a lot of other traditions. We don't have a shared set of answers to the big questions. We don't even always agree on what the big questions are. If 4 people sit together in our congregation, they're going to have 4 different beliefs about what happens when we die. And the blessing of being a Unitarian Universalist is that we have the opportunity to travel with others who understand the world and those big questions of life in different ways. As we journey together, we can learn from each other. We can continue to build our beloved community that we have been gifted by our ancestors. No, as Unitarian Universalists, we don't gather to learn all the answers from our minister, thank goodness. Professional ministers can bring their own education, training, and experience to the table, but as I shared with you last month, we are all called to minister to one another and the world in this tradition. And this is one of the biggest challenges we share. We each bring our own candle into this faith. Many candles of belief, of thought, of identity, to light the common flaming chalice of Unitarian Universalism. Our common flame illuminates the path we walk through life together as we find ourselves navigating through through joy and suffering, disappointment and accomplishment. The flame shines the light on the truth that life is not easy, and it is unbelievably glorious. We acknowledge this every time we come together on a Sunday morning. This is what our faith offers. As we walk through the hills and the valleys, as we face personal difficulties and loss and larger social injustices, we are not doing it in the darkness. We are not doing it alone. As we journey together, we are bound by the idea that in all our diversity, our shared flame is strong, because who we are, how we are in the world matters. We practice an active, embodied faith that calls us to live every day the consequences of love. So what are the consequences of love? What does it look like when love is lived out? I invite you to look at your hands. Maybe your hands are sore from working in the garden, or maybe they're just sore. Consider all that your hands do. All of our hands have done things we regret, broken a precious item, tightened in unfair anger, carried out choices we would not make again. And your hands have also prepared meals that have fed others. They've clapped with joy. They write or type or text words that help connect you to other people and bring greater knowledge to the world. Your hands have created beautiful things, works of art, scarves, stories. They've helped steady other people while walking. They've held books. They've opened wide to receive or give a hug. They've given gifts. They've held doors to allow people into the room. There is beauty in these hands, in your hands, and in the opportunities they offer you to live the consequences of love into this community and into the world. UU minister and author Tom Owen Toole says, "To make our lives matter, to embody our faith, we must employ our hands to the utmost. Our hands are summoned to be shaken in friendship, extended in resistance, spread in loving embrace, folded in prayer, aroused to clapping, and unfurled to welcome the alien and enfold the needy." In an embodied faith, our hands are reaching out in service, holding firm in resistance, clasping others in comfort, and getting dirty in messy social causes. And ultimately, your hands just represent you. They represent what you contribute to a unique light. You contribute a unique light to the common flame of this church. And you take part of that flame out from here each week to share it with others. And part of what Tom is pointing out is that even seemingly simple acts do make a difference. We often get the idea that the power to transform the world lies in the hands of a few standouts, those who have the time and energy to devote everything to the work, to climb a flagpole, to remove a Confederate flag, to organize or attend a women's march, to stand outside an airport in solidarity with immigrants. While the importance of such actions for justice cannot be discounted, the practice of Unitarian Universalism is even more demanding than that. We call ourselves to a radical, life-changing, life-saving, everyday love. This is the love that lives in the everyday action of sitting next to a person you don't often speak to, in church, for example. Asking questions, extending the hand of friendship, of reaching to offer a hug to a person in need, caring for an animal, and in the loving care of your own self. This is where the radical transforming acts begin, in the moments of connection and relationship we have with all other life in this intricate, interdependent web. This kind of love asks us to embody this faith that holds principles of justice and compassion, that honors relationships humans have with each other and the world. And it asks us to live lives of radical kindness in every moment. In so many ways, an impossible task. In our efforts to live out the consequences of a Unitarian Universalist love, we will be confronted by our own limitations. There will be times of despair, especially when we see big systemic forces that stand against us. The threat to our siblings in faith against Muslims and Jews in particular, the whirlwind of change that threatens immigrants who are being deported, journalists who are being declared enemies, wealth inequality and poverty. Sometimes we will become weak and tired, and carrying the flame will seem futile. But resistance is not futile. It is when we feel this despair, when we wonder if we can possibly transform this world into a place of justice and equity, it is in those moments that we must reach out to others. We must bring our diverse candles together to rekindle a community of light destined to dispel the darkness. This is why we gather every week, not just to hear a good sermon, I hope, or see and be seen. We come together to shine light on what love looks like in the world from our many perspectives, and to be renewed by the warmth of our common flaming chalice. As Albert Schweitzer says, sometimes our light goes out, but is blown again into instant flame by an encounter with another human being. When we approach our lives with this rekindled love, we are open to encounters with our best selves. We offer renewal to others on the path, and we in turn are renewed. It is in that space we become open to the love, and what we have to offer the world matters in ways we will never know or understand. I have a final story for you. On my first visit to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Topeka, Kansas, where I grew up, which was in fact my first visit to any Unitarian Universalist anything anywhere, I sat next to a woman who was knitting. And as the service continued, I was distracted because she was working on this fuzzy purple scarf that was exactly my favorite shade of purple. And it was like, I periodically would like, it's so soft. And as the service continued, she worked on it even more, and I was impressed at how quickly it was coming together. And I complimented both the scarf and her skill. And I thought it was done there. When I came back in a week, maybe it was 2, she gave me the fuzzy, soft purple scarf. It was a completely unexpected, overwhelming gesture of generosity. And I have cherished that scarf as a symbol of transformative love and hospitality. When I told that story as a part of a sermon years later on a visit home from seminary, she came to me after the service and she's like, I don't remember that at all. But what was even more remarkable was how many people came to her after the service to tell her their own stories, to remind her of powerful hugs, of kind words, of meals and conversations that had made a difference to them. Her flame changed and strengthened the candle of our faith. Where have you encountered the consequence of love? Where has the person next to you encountered it? When we live love into the world, even the small day-to-day encounters are transformed. This is the real hard work of our journey of faith together, to constantly seek ways to bring to life the inherent worth and dignity of every person, to work for justice, equity, and compassion, to accept and encourage one another, and to respect the interdependent web of all existence. My beloved spiritual companions, Unitarian Universalism brings different candles together to form one flame, a flame that burns for love, illuminating truth, offering warmth. Love is the message of this faith, from the largest protest to the smallest forgotten act. It is love that will change this world. I invite you to look at this chalice we light together each week. And look at your hands again and think of how you will carry this flame out into the world. May we all live day by day with the consequence of love. May it be so.